Outnumbered 2 to 1 is never an easy fight. Galenus, however, had his small squadron of Spartans to protect the few scorpions facing the mountains, growing larger the further you look. In between them we had Sarmatians already engaging the enemy front lines, leading them straight to our position, just like the legendary commander wanted. Once the battle starts, our Thracian warriors will appear behind the enemy lines and encircle their position. However, that was not to be, as the Daci scouts both spotted and charged them before the battle had officially begun. The few remaining Sarmatian cataphracts ran to the rescue and scared away the scouts, being drawn out to the open fields in the path of the Dacian horde. Although the heavy armor made the cataphracts astonishingly slow, they were still able to move swiftly around the field and hit pinned down hoplites with crushing speed. The Dacians tried to flee, saying every man for themselves, yet without any success. Galenus was out for blood after their bold attack almost a decade ago. The Sarmatians dashed through the enemy lines, making the end of the Daci. Losing 700 skilled warriors in exchange for the destruction of a tribe that had already conceded defeat and surrendered their arms in return for peace was a heavy price only the most selfish of people were willing to pay. Galenus included, whose desire for blood and vengeance was without end. At least this meant the Spartan soldiers could continue their attacks at the Daci and even besiege the capital. A perfect alibi for Galenus, as another assassination plot on the king Acritatus II was discovered from a rival party. Still scarred from the last attempt, he took no chance and jailed the only man linked to the plot. Diodorus, the one he had charged to secure the Westerlands, was removed, stripping him from both ranks and titles to rot in a prison. Homer, a lesser known man, would take over in his place. He was quite useless, more focused on epic tales of the past, not fit to lead an army. Alavas, however, showed his expertise as a tactician, now leading the assault on the main Swaber stronghold. They did sally out, but in a heroic display of both cunning and bravery, he thrashed the attackers, making it possible to scale the walls and secure it without any casualties. He proved he wanted the best for his men, making them dangerously loyal to him personally and not Acritatus. There was no reason to ring the alarms just yet, unless you ask his closest advisors, claiming he had a different motive. Was he part of the assassination plot? Who knows? After 6 months of besieging Syndigon, the heir Eugenius demanded an all-out assault on the walls. He took them with any means necessary, costing the lives of our last Sarmatian cataphracts without being able to get any like them again. But its walls was ours, giving us an unshakable fortification in the plains of Pannonia. With casualties this severe, Galenus returned back to Dacia, where a bit of military infrastructure still was present. He filled out his ranks with cheap pikes, because if Alexander the Great could use pikemen to score victories and fame, why not him too? With the continuously growing population in Lugi and Sarmatia, the need for food and farms imploded, or soon to do so at least. The open terrain of Pannonia could act as a great place to sow our crops, if we could fully occupy them in time, that is. Yet the Daci forces locked us inside the walls, causing famine and disease to spread among our troops. Eugenius himself actually became so ill, he was smuggled through to the other side and back home to Boudorgis. With the only confirmed loyalists now away from the front lines, Gallienus had free range to scheme as he wished. And for once, that is a good thing, as the Alps was filled with hordes of enemies on their way towards Pannonia. Germanic and Celtic warriors alike. Who was first on his list of victims? The besieging Daci army, of course. It wasn't pretty. It never is really, but a victory is a victory. They never fully recovered from this, at least not for many years. Gallienus sent the second army back to replenish while he personally guarded the city throughout the winter. But after crushing a tiny rebellion, he rolled the dice and risked leaving Sintigon undefended in an attempt to gain ground on the enemy while they were down. Segestica would prove to be adequate for farm management. However, now all the Thracians had left the army, either through service on the field or as a coward. A band of elite Celts took over in their place. Of all the different cultures we have had serving in the Spartan ranks, the only ones who continued to cause havoc on our enemies are the Sarmatians, true heroes of Sparta. The thing is, now in order to gain full control over Pannonia, the settlement of a king had to come under our possession. It wasn't far away, but protected by more armies than we could have feared. But as careless as ever, Gallienus decided none will stay in his path, and thus formed up an impressive wooden wall around his encampment. And when the Iravisci arrived, he was ready, taking out the equivalent of 2 Celtic armies at once. However, they would make one more attempt a bit further east, but to the luck of Gallienus, they appeared right in front of another Spartan battalion, ruining them without any standing army. Gallienus secured the last Pannonian settlement, while Alavas, who was supposed to protect the Germanic regions, abandoned his post to take Noria. He claims it was for the good of Sparta, but that man simply couldn't see the bigger picture. He was the last line of defense against the Sway Boys. They never attacked, but if they did, our damn capital was at risk. The fool. Nevertheless, our food problem was solved at last, and with most of our enemies severely beaten, we could finally lick our wounds. This was a good time for Acritatus to get an overview of the world. In the west, our Carthaginian allies have struggled to gain ground in Cisalpine Gaul, with Genoa being the main focal point of dozens of battles for many years now. But it seems like the tides have shifted. As Rome invested more men in that front, they eventually got dragged into a lengthy siege of Massalia. So long, in fact, the south was completely undefended. Syracuse fell, with Carthage pushing into Italy itself. Rome made a drastic attempt to muster a great force at their capital during their war in turmoil, but to no success, and now Taras, the city formerly controlled by Pyrrhus himself, was under siege, with both naval and land superiority. It looks like the Punic nation is getting the better of Rome. However, they aren't so easily broken. A single legion under the command of Antonius had landed in Greece. He was different. Decisive, swift and cunning. Within a single year, he conquered both Pella and Athens. And shortly after that, all contact from Sparta itself was halted. I sincerely hope they are alright. North of that, in Gaul, the Luxuvi has united most of the Gallic tribes in an attempt to repel the Brits trying to invade their lands. I see no ending in the struggle for generations to come. We could intervene at some point. Either tribe would be good to have as an ally. And to the east, our Bosporan friends have found themselves in a predicament. Overly ambitious, the former colony had pushed further inland than expected, leaving their main source of power, the sea, behind them. Now they face the consequences. We don't know much about these enemies of theirs, not their lands, their kings, or religions, except for their names. The dreaded successor state Seleucids, those we know all too well, but the others, Mauryaans, strange folk from faraway lands. Their armies must be powerful for them to reach Babylon, the famous city, and Parthia with horsemen famous enough to rival our great Sarmatian allies. The Bosporus don't stand a chance against them. We could send aid their way. But first, we need to consolidate our powers. In Germania, rebellions kept erupting out of nowhere. Homer, the useless general, who took over for Diodorus after his imprisonment, would do his best to solve it. In the best way he could, in fact, which still is pretty atrocious. I wonder why such a prestigious man like Diodorus would have risked assassinating the king. Or perhaps it wasn't actually him. Alavas, the man who abandoned his post from Germania, had all of a sudden grouped up with Gallienus. Clearly, they planned something. But it wouldn't be discovered before it was too late. With most of our armies back in mainland, they left just a skeleton crew to guard our borders, while they murdered and pillaged the independent tribes and friends of the state within our borders, marching straight for the capital. This couldn't be good. Now all the tribes were in open rebellion against us. Homer, the drunk fool that he was, lost most of his men in a battle to save the king and the core regions. They were eventually successful and seized all semi-independent tribes within our lands. Sparta was united at last. You see, even though the world rose up against him, Acritatus had spent most of his time and money gathering support for the Agiad dynasty. A lengthy process which caused massive outrage among the other nobles. Gallienus and Alavas most of all. They despised the royal family, weaklings hiding in the capital, while all the true men fight on the front lines. But when the king demanded an audience from all the nobles and lords of the Spartan kingdom, they knew what he had done. Acritatus proclaimed himself as emperor of the Spartan kingdom, now to be empire, to take full control of his lands and ensure no idiotic expansions will ever happen again, just like Alavas and Gallienus have been so good at over the last few years. Outrage, anger and foul words filled the halls. The two generals spoke out against the newly proclaimed emperor, claiming that he was undeserving, arrogant and stupid for doing this. Acritatus, who for the first time felt as if he was the most powerful man alive, provoked the generals, daring them to rise up against him if they are so against his ideas. To the surprise of many, Gallienus bowed down, not willing to risk his life against all of Sparta, the country he had fought so hard to preserve. But Alavas, on the other hand, felt different. He claimed he was behind the plot to kill the king all along, hiding in the shadows, overlooked by all the other nobles. He planted the evidence on Diodorus, knowing he had discovered the truth of his plans. He left the capital with all haste, returned to his wounded army and Dacia under his command. Alavas had challenged the king, Sparta was in a civil war.